You've got
Welcome, everyone. Today is our first teach-in, Your Vote Matters, You Matter. My name is Dr. Tawana Wingfield, and I am here with our lovely students who have gathered together to put on this discussion with you this evening about the importance of your vote and why your vote matters. This is a nonpartisan event. We are just here to provide you with information so that you are aware of how these propositions will impact and affect all of us moving forward.
Okay, so before we get started, go back. There you go. Before we get started, we just would like to acknowledge the land that we are on and that representation. So again, for Northridge, we acknowledge the Chumash, Tongva, and Tataviam lands. And this website, you can go to look and see what land you might be a part of.
Unfortunately, we weren't able to put this in the chat, but if y'all can screenshot or take a photo of this little voter guide we prepared for tonight, you can take notes. If you prefer to actually have your sample ballot, we're just going to go through all the propositions tonight. So we'll leave it on here for a few seconds. Feel free to take a note. Take notes on this.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rosa. Thank you again for being with us in this space. The following are a few guidelines that we have outlined for today's workshop. This presentation is bipartisan, meaning that we are presenting from a neutral ground to present both sides of the propositions. Our aim is to assist you to better understand propositions for the state of California to make a well-informed vote. We ask that you listen respectfully without interrupting others, respect one another's views and values, criticize ideas, not individuals, commit to learning about the propositions, not debate with others. We ask that you mute your microphone when others are speaking, and please feel free to use the chat, and we will also have a Q&A at the end.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rosa, and everybody here present. I'm going to go ahead and get us started by introducing the first measure, which is Measure J. And it's only applicable in the LA County, and it focuses on reimagining LA. So it will increase resources for our communities and will require our county government to invest at least 10% of the budget to alternatives to incarceration. So, and it would ultimately prohibit the funds to be used by law enforcement agencies. Measure J is endorsed by a few agencies like LA County Democratic Party, Black Lives Matter, LA, National Union of Healthcare Workers, and more. For example, the Board of Supervisors and the United Way of Greater of Los Angeles say that Measure J will address the disproportionate rate of racial injustices and focuses on investing into communities that are often impacted by incarceration by offering direct community investments such as community-based youth development programs, job trainings, create access to capital for small minority-owned businesses, specifically Black-owned businesses, affordable housing resources, and amongst others. In forms of alternative to incarceration, it is proposed to have community-based restorative justice programs, community-based health services, counseling, wellness and prevention programs, mental health services, and more. To name a few opponents for Measure J, we have Sheriff Alex Villanueva, a coalition of county union, Association for Los Angeles Deputy Sheriffs, Association of Deputy District Attorney, and Los Angeles Firefighters Local 1014. They believe that Measure J defunds essential workers such as police officers, firefighters, and healthcare workers. They also believe that Measure J has devastating and far-reaching consequences for vital services like 911 emergency response, public health services, firefighting aircrafts, and other first responder vehicle maintenance. You can also learn more about the pros and cons by visiting the website yesonj.reimagine.la and nomeasurej.com, which I'll post in the chat for your reference. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the next proposition. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Griffin. I'm going to be speaking on Proposition 14, the Stem Cell Research Institute Bond Initiative. So just simply put, if you vote yes, we'll be issuing $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds to our state Stem Cell Research Institute, which was first funded in 2004. A vote for no would not issue the $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds. Just so you know, general obligation bonds come from our state income taxes and sales taxes. So that's where we get our bond money from. In support, stem cell research is a leading area of science and medicine and continues to support possible cures and treatments for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, epilepsy, strokes, and other major neurological conditions. And supporting yes would also allow some institutional changes to be made within the research institute that would allow further funding for those programs. Only 7.5% of the 5.5 billion that's received can be going towards infrastructure. All the rest will be going towards research and programming. On the no side, the real argument is that we first passed this bond, or a $3 billion bond proposition in 2004 to fund stem cell research, and we ran out of that money in 2019. The argument really made there is that when we passed the proposition in 2004, stem cell research was not federally legal. It was federally banned by President George W. Bush. Now the government allows stem cell research nationally. So the argument is that we don't need to be placing that much money into stem cell research if other states and other organizations can be doing that. Also, there's an argument that there is a lack of a governing body in place for the Research Institute, which has led to possible issues with funding allocations. But as you can see, nobody is currently funding, supporting opposition, and there are a lot of supporters, as you can see there, for voting yes. And as a sort of social justice issue, stem cell research really is looking forward for the cures for major neurological conditions that a lot of families struggle with and need support in. So that's sort of a major social justice issue, is the medical aspect of that. I'm going to pass it on to the next person.
Thank you. So I'll be covering Proposition 15, also known as Communities and Schools First. It's actually also known as the split roll, which will divide, if voted yes, will divide the regulations between homeowners and commercial property owners in order to increase funding in K through school public education, community colleges, and local government services by funding with 11.5 billion and increasing the tax laws on commercial and industrial property, meaning that it would start changing the tax laws for, let's say, like big corporations like Walmart or Amazon, in order to increase those tax yearly. Some supporters for Proposition 15 would be California Teachers Association, PAC, Dolores Huerta Foundation, Future Leaders of America, SCIU California State Council. A no on Proposition 15 will not increase any property taxes on large corporations based on their market prices for value of the property. Some supporters for this proposition would be California Business Roundtable Issues, PAC, Paramount Group, Inc., Americans for Tax Reform, And this proposition relates to social justice just because schools in low socioeconomic neighborhoods and across California are not built the same. Communities have limited resources, and this proposition aims to provide more assistance in schools and communities, such as during COVID, probably assisting students with additional equipment for distance learning or additional funding for community clinics. So I will pass it now to the following proposition. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I have Proposition 16, diversity as a factor. This particular proposition will repeal the ban on affirmative action. And so supporters of Proposition 16, a yes vote essentially means that state and local entities could consider race, sex, color, ethnicity, and nation of origin in public education, public employment, public contracting to the extent allowed under federal and state law. Opponents would say a vote for no for this particular measure would maintain the current ban. So the current ban on the consideration of race, sex, color, ethnicity, nation of origin in public education, public employment, and public contracting. Now, the social justice issues or injustices here as it relates to this particular proposition are that pay equity for all. So pay equity for women that are doing similar work as men and for people of color. An increase in opportunities to receive public contracts for women and people of color and small businesses. Access or lack thereof to fair wages for jobs and quality education. There's an opportunity gap in education as it relates to racial and ethnic minority children from pre-K through 12. Lack of investments coming back into underserved communities. And 6, discrimination in hiring and admissions practices. So again, Proposition 16, as it relates to diversity as a factor, a vote of yes would repeal the ban on affirmative action. A vote of no would maintain that ban in place.
Hi, I'm Diana, and I'm presenting Proposition 17, which restores the right to vote after completing a prison sentence. So Proposition 17 would amend the California Constitution to restore voting rights to persons on state parole. It was put on the ballot by a vote of more than 2/3 of the state legislature, and it would affect roughly 50,000 Californians who are currently on state parole. Arguments for yes on 17 include that there was a study conducted showing that people who have completed their prison sentences and had voting rights restored are less likely to commit crimes in the future. Top funders of this proposition include several individual philanthropists and the ACLU. Supporters include US Senator Kamala Harris, Secretary of State Alex Padilla, Governor Gavin Newsom, the California Democratic Party, the ACLU of California, the Brennan Center for Justice, and the League of Women Voters of California. And then the argument against Proposition 17 is that parole is the adjustment period when violent felons prove that they are no longer a violent threat to innocent civilians living in a civil society. Proposition 17 will allow criminals convicted of serious and violent crimes to vote before completing their sentence, including parole. There are no funders for no on 17, and the supporters include State Senator Jim Nielsen and the Republican Party of California. The social justice issues surrounding this topic is that people of color and people of lower socioeconomic status are overrepresented in the prison population. By prohibiting them from voting, it decreases the political influence that these groups are able to have. And that's it.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Dee Dee, and I will go over Prop 18. So Prop 18 is on 17-year-olds can vote during primary and special elections if they will turn 18 by the next general election. So just a yes vote means that allowing 17-year-olds to vote in these primaries gives them a chance to shape their choices and enhance their involvement with elections. They mentioned that 17-year-olds are working, they're part of society, they're in extracurricular activities that might be geared towards issues that are involved with primary or special elections. So giving them that chance to have a say in those things that they experience daily. But on the no side, we're just looking at opponents say that 17-year-olds are considered minors, and that gives them a reason not to allow them to vote. And they mentioned that because of their lack of brain development, they're not up to par with mature adults. So this is also a backing of their reasoning to not let them vote. So that's just a yes and no on Prop 18, and I will pass it on to Prop 19.
So Proposition 19 is all about property tax transfers. So in California, if you purchased a house years ago and you had a lower property tax rate, if certain eligible homeowners are able to transfer that lower tax rate to new properties. So a yes on Prop 19 would increase that transfer rate from 1 to 3 times for homeowners over 55 years old and with severe disabilities. You may have seen some ads. The firefighter associations seem to support this proposition because the revenue that's created through it will go to wildfire agencies. An additional point is that inherited properties would not receive that tax benefit unless the child was actually living there. So if they were using the property as like an Airbnb, they could not inherit the lower tax rate. So critics of this proposition point out that it was basically created and funded by the Association of Realtors, and they argue that they're doing that to get more commission rates. So critics basically say that this proposition doesn't adequately address property tax transfer laws in a meaningful way. We know that California has a housing affordability crisis, and this proposition doesn't really address some of those inequity issues. It doesn't create a road in for new homeowners or people who want to become homeowners, but only protects existing homeowners. And I will pass it on to the next proposition.
So Prop 20 is all about restricting parole for nonviolent offenders. It would make it easier to charge certain crimes as felonies and prohibit early parole for more crimes. It's an effort to roll back portions of previous measures designed to reduce California's state prison population. Some supporters include the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, Truth in American Government Fund, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Employees Benefit Association, and Sempra Energy. More specifically, domestic abuse, child trafficking, and those who have drugged or raped others would be considered violent offenses. Opponents include the ACLU, the California Democratic Party, Equality California, Crime Survivors or Safety and Justice, and more. In support of this, or the opponents of this would say that most felonies are nonviolent crimes, and recategorizing criminal sentencing charges would perpetuate mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex. And I'll pass it off to the next proposition.
Hi everyone, my name is Patricia and I'm presenting on Proposition 21, which is about expanding local government's ability to rent control. So I'll vote yes, will enable local governments to enact rent control laws on residential properties over 15 years old. This exempts property owners who own up to 2 residential properties. This proposition is supported by Bernie Sanders, Democratic Party, AIDS Healthcare Foundation, California Nurses Association, and the Eviction Defense Network. A vote no will not expand local government's ability to enact rent control. If cities expand rent control, there could be a potential loss of property tax dollars over time in the tens of millions. And opponents of this proposition include California Business Roundtable, Corporate Landlords, California Apartment Association, and the California Seniors Advocates League. For context, housing costs in California is one of the highest in the nation. homelessness in LA County alone is up to 13% from last year, and this isn't accounting for the effects of the pandemic. Many renters in LA use over half of their income on rent alone. Displacement of low-income residents and rates of homelessness are connected to housing affordability. Last year, a statewide rent control was passed, but housing advocates argue that this is not enough. Prop 21 will essentially roll back limits placed by a 1995 law that took away local rent control that were already in place. And that 1995 law favored housing developers. And I'll pass it on to the next prop.
Hello. Prop 22 is a prop that was introduced basically as a reaction to last year's voter passed bill AB 5. So the prop would classify app-based drivers as independent contractors rather than employees so that the tech companies affected don't have to pay them employee benefits. So a yes vote means you're supporting the ballot initiative and defining the app-based transportation or rideshare as independent contractors. So basically that's a new adaptation of labor and wage policies specific to that type of work. Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash say that the measure would allow their drivers to keep working whenever they want to. Additionally, Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash say that if their drivers become employees, they will not have the money available to pay them. Uber and Lyft have also said that if Prop 22 does not pass, they will leave California, taking their jobs from their headquarters with them. A no vote means that you do not support this ballot initiative, which means that AB 5, which was passed by voters last year, would be the law that is deciding whether or not rideshare workers are employees or independent contractors. Opponents say that allowing companies to ignore state laws that require fair wages, healthcare, and unemployment insurance, sick leave, and other basic rights is something that Prop 22 would be supporting. Prop 22 also weakens anti-discrimination and anti-harassment protection for their drivers. I think it's worth noting that a lot of money has been thrown behind this proposition, the most money in US history, in fact. Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash have spent $180 million on the Yes on 22 campaign. Basically, the companies say that this is a flexibility and categorization issue, while the opposition side is saying that passing this bill would be a real harm to workers' rights. Next slide.
Hi everyone, so I'm doing Proposition 23, the Dialysis Clinic Requirements Initiative. So what this proposition is asking for is to have on-site physicians on-site in the clinic while patients are being treated, having more reported data on dialysis-related infections, to obtain consent from the state health department before closing a clinic, and to not discriminate against patients based on their source of payment for care. So on the support side, it's basically restating everything I just said. The goal is to have it more in check, and also to have this, to have dialysis more available in wealthier and poor neighborhoods, regardless of the skin of your color and regardless of the type of insurance that you carry. This is supported by the California Democratic Party, and this is also supported by the union SEIU UHW West, which is a union of major healthcare hospitals and services. In terms of opposition, Prop 23 is seen as being something threatening to many patients and already running dialysis clinics. It also increases healthcare costs to hundreds of millions of dollars annually, and in effect, it would cause a doctor shortage, but also push people to go more to the ER or wait to have dialysis because of all of this happening. So this is opposed by the Republican Party of California, the American Nurses Association California, the California Medical Association, and healthcare industries such as DaVita, Freeze's Medical Care, the AMVETS, American Legion, California NAACP State Conference. Yeah, so this is Prop 23.
So Prop 24 is the Consumer Personal Information Law and Agency Initiative. This prop is building on the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, which was a privacy law that the state legislature enacted, and it went into effect on January 1st of this year. So this prop requires companies to not share a consumer's personal information upon the consumer's request. It allows an opt-out option for having their sensitive information as defined in law used or disclosed for advertising. Requires opt-in consent to use information from consumers under 18. So in support of this law is California NAACP State Conference, Consumer Watchdog, Andrew Yang. And then just a few words from people, from the supporters. They say that the existing privacy law doesn't have enough teeth. So that's the one that was passed in 2018. Updates in Prop 24 would create a system to enforce the privacy laws and triple fines on companies that violate kids' privacy. They would give consumers more control over their most personal data, allow you to shield your precise location from tracking, and give you more ability to sue companies if your email and password are stolen or hacked. Passing this proposition will make it harder for lobbyists to change privacy laws in the legislature. In opposition, there is the Green Party of California, the Libertarian Party of California, and the Republican Party of California. Some words from opponents is that California's privacy law is very new. So that's the one that went into effect on January 1st of this year. It just went into effect, so we should see how it plays out before changing it. Some of the updates in Prop 24 would hurt consumers, delaying a rule that allows workers to find out what information employers collect about them, making it easier for businesses to charge you more if you don't let them sell your data, and allowing tech companies to grab your data when you leave California. This proposition is the pet project of one man and lacks backing from a broad coalition of privacy advocates. In fact, some of them oppose it. Tech companies are surprisingly quiet about this measure. The Internet Association and California Chamber of Commerce criticized it in a legislative hearing, but have no formal opposition on it. So the big criticism is that it creates kind of a pay-to-play environment in which you can opt out of having your information used. However, then big internet companies can charge you more to use their services. So that's where this prop stands.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us tonight. Dr. McCarty Kaplan here, and I'll be speaking briefly about Prop 25, which is about replacing cash bail in California with a risk assessment program. So essentially, a yes vote on this would end cash bail as we know it, replacing it with an algorithm-based system of risk assessment that would determine whether or not a person that is being accused of a crime or has been arrested should be held in jail while they await their trial. Interestingly, and this is an important point, it also allows judges the discretion to determine, in addition to the algorithm, who they may or may not feel are a risk to be put on the street, so to speak. No vote would essentially keep the status quo of the state that has been going on for quite some time, which requires that a person pay bail themselves in order to come out of jail after an arrest in between when they've been arrested and their trial date, or to pay somebody like a bail bonds company to post their bail in order to come out of jail while they await their trial. To answer a brief question, what is the CFA? That's the California Faculty Association. So this measure, or sorry, proposition is endorsed by folks like the Dolores Huerta Foundation, the California Faculty Association, League of Women Voters, Black Jewish Alliance, and many others. It's opposed by the American Legion, Crime Victims Alliance, many police organizations, and of course, bail bond companies, and interestingly, a number of NAACP chapters in the state. Next slide, please. So if this prop seems familiar to you, that's because in 2018, this was actually something that was signed into law by Governor Jerry Brown following its development from the California State Legislature. So what we're looking at now is the result of a coordinated effort by people who were opposed to that law, bringing this up as a referendum that we now are all voting on. So depending on how this vote goes, the law that was signed into action in 2018 will go into effect. It's basically been put on hold until we solve this problem, so to speak. So the big issues here are the idea that those in favor are suggesting that cash bail is racist, classist, and essentially unfair, specifically to communities of color and folks with low income, as they are less likely to be able to pay their way out of jail and or are more likely to face higher sentencing and longer times in jail and or prison. The social justice argument coming from that side of this debate is that this, without canceling cash bail, we're basically funding and putting more and more resources into the prison industrial complex, funneling money and bodies into what many consider a broken system. So the opposing argument is somewhat interesting. There are basically two camps. The first is that, and this is the more traditional opposition argument, that simply ending cash bail will lead to more crime by having more violent people or criminals back on the streets when they could be locked up behind bars, and therefore if they're on the street they could potentially cause more crime. The second argument is a little bit more nuanced and interesting to me, at least personally, and that is that cash bail is wrong, so folks are against cash bail generally, but the issue is with the idea that the judges are given the power to determine whether or not the algorithm says somebody's at risk, who gets to be put back on the street. So the second argument here is basically that judges will have too much power in this new measure or new proposition.
And we can open it up for some Q&A now. Yancy.
Yeah, so if you folks have specific questions you want to put into the chat box, that's fine. We've got one of our wonderful students monitoring that, so they'll bring those up. Also, if you have specific questions about propositions, something that sparked your interest, feel free to unmute yourself. Just do recall our kind of rules of engagement as far as not talking over each other and leading with graciousness, empathy, and patience would be key. And we'll see where we're going to go with this. Dr.
Brown here. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Comment first. The fantastic. Thank you all for this so very much. I appreciate it more than words can say. I have a question about Prop 18 specifically. I was reading before this. I loved what was said, but I was reading and my initial reaction was, of course, we should let 17-year-olds have a say in what they're going to be and who they're going to be electing or who they would be eligible to elect. But somewhere, I think it was LAist or wherever it was that I was reading, there was something about the amount of money that it would cost to implement number 18, Proposition 18. Can you say anything about that? I don't remember exactly what I read, but I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's costly. Thoughts, comments?
So again, what were you referring to? What cost?
Yeah, the cost of that passing.
I'd have to
and if you
look
don't have that, it's okay. I'll keep looking.
Yeah, I have to look too, because I had the book and that's where I got my information from, but I can definitely look and keep you updated on what that looks like.
Cool. Thank you.
The summary here says fiscal impact increased statewide county costs likely between several hundreds of thousands of dollars and 1 million every 2 years. Increased one-time cost to the state of hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's what it says in the summary.
Dr. Brown, did you hear that one? Okay.
I did hear that. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
I saw a question in the chat regarding Prop 25, the one I was speaking about with regard to the algorithm. And it was specifically asking how the algorithm is being designed or what are the factors being considered. And to answer that question, I have no idea. And that is one of the issues with that specific proposition. I'm sure there is some level of nuance in it, but that does give people pause when you're starting to kind of pass over some decision-making powers to a computer-based algorithm. So yes, that is certainly a concern. However, the counterpoint would be that you're much more likely to have an unbiased, or the argument is that you would have a more unbiased response regarding people's risk in the streets by taking the human and their biases out of it. Now, being all critical thinkers, I'm sure we are also aware that those who create algorithms are also humans. And so it's not exactly an objective process all the time anyway, but some more food for thought there.
Would y'all be able to explain Proposition 16 a little bit more?
That would be mine. So in 1996, Proposition 209 was passed. And so Proposition 16 would basically repeal Proposition 209. So what it says in the book, and I got this directly out of, the handy dandy book we have, but it says in 1996, California voters banned consideration of race, sex, color, ethnicity, and nation of origin in public programs. What's problematic about that is we are taking a colorblind, neutral stance or perspective in terms of employment practices, hiring practices, admissions policies, who will get contracts, who won't get contracts. And that's troubling because if people are left to their own devices, they will more often than not look over someone else that may be qualified for these positions or roles in this work. And so this particular proposition is basically wanting to ban Proposition 209. And in 96, this was a pretty hot topic back then. I mean, the entire country was talking about it. And as we know, California and oftentimes states sets precedents for what other states will do. And as a former admissions person, not factoring in issues around race and ethnicity and even gender in admissions practices could be troubling for programs that want to have a more robust and diverse applicant pool. Does that answer your question, or did you have something more specific?
It was good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Dr. Tuana, it's Laura. Just to go off on that, so what would a no mean for that proposition?
It will keep Proposition 209 in place. And so people can continue to, look, not necessarily use, consider race, sex, color, ethnicity in their hiring practices, in their employment and education and in admissions. So it would keep Proposition 209 in place, essentially. A yes vote would mean it would repeal Proposition 209.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I wanted to share just to give it a little bit of context. I know that the ban in place currently has really impacted higher education. So students and UC system has said openly that they have not been able to enroll students from diverse populations at the rate that they did prior to the ban. And they're trying to figure out ways to recruit more students because the current system is just not allowing them to be more purposeful when they are admitting students into UC systems or Cal State systems.
There's a question in the chat. So a yes on Prop 16 would ban affirmative action. No. The yes on Proposition 16 would ban the Proposition 209. So essentially, local entities would be able to consider race, sex, color, and ethnicity in public employment and in admissions and in contracts. I hope that clears up. Yes. So Dr. Pius says yes on 16, yes on affirmative action. You're welcome.
Can we go over measure 22? I just like $180 million is a lot of money. So I'm trying to understand the language a bit more about the rideshare measure.
Lillian, are you here? She might have had to step away.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. Could you repeat the question? Sorry, I'm a little being pulled in a couple different directions.
That's okay. I honestly can just read it, or if anybody is more well versed, which would be anyone but me on this, I'd just like some insight as to like, because it says Uber and Lyft will leave California. And do we have any, like, have they made statements? Has that been confirmed? I'm just curious.
Yeah. That is currently what they've said that they would do. So right now it's a threat. Saying a threat, it might be like a strong word. I don't want to color it that way. But they have said that if they don't get their way, that they would leave. Whether or not they actually do that, I do not know. But
Okay. Thank you.
Sounds like a threat to me.
One consideration for this proposition is that some people are concerned about, I guess the no side would be concerned about corporations of this size being able to circumvent the legislature to suit their own interests, and that's kind of a scary precedent, because part of Prop 22 is a provision which says it would take, I think, 6/7 of the legislator, like a super majority, to change anything in it. So they're not only trying to say that they don't have to classify their workers as employees, but then to also make it pretty much impossible to change, for the legislator to change that in the future if they wanted to. So there is just that concern about, can businesses come in and rewrite California laws through the proposition process and overturn what lawmakers have already decided? So I know that's a concern.
Yeah, thank you, May. And in fact, apologies all. I will leave this in May and everyone else's hands to answer. I'm going to sign off.
I guess another follow-up question on that: if they leave the state, does that mean that we would no longer have Uber and Lyft in the state of California? Would the drivers still be able to drive in the state? I know that they're like everywhere. So would it just mean like their corporate offices wouldn't be here anymore?
I think it's that the service wouldn't be here anymore, because they're saying that in order to fund the cost of having an employee versus an independent contractor, so paying health insurance and sick leave and like different kinds of benefits that people would be entitled to as employees, that would raise the prices on their services to the extent that it wouldn't be worth offering it anymore, that they would just go somewhere else.
I also heard that a yes for Prop 22 would, correct me if I'm wrong, I read it online, but basically the drivers, since they're independent contractors, they can get sued themselves. So like if you want to sue Uber and Lyft, you wouldn't be able to sue the corporate anymore. You would sue that individual driver because they're an independent contractor. So Uber and Lyft are no longer like involved in that situation if there has to be a lawsuit.
Which is difficult because you can't get a settlement from an individual driver that would give you, what you maybe deserved depending on what happened. So it's more useful to sue a large organization if you're trying to get a reasonable settlement.
All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns as we're going through this? We still have a little bit of time.
I had a question on Prop 19. I don't own a home, so this is all like new to me. So I kind of want to break down what would a yes look like on that prop in a way that, like, someone like me who doesn't own a home can understand.
Yeah, so basically, people who bought their homes a long time ago, when their when the home prices and also the property tax rates were lower, if they're eligible, they're able to transfer that tax rate to another house with higher tax rates, because all property taxes are higher in 2020. But this specific law allows people to keep lower tax rates. So this proposition is essentially just like increasing that ability to transfer that rate. And that's why the critics, so it's interesting because it was supported by NASW California, which we will, if you haven't already and you want the PowerPoint and the PDF notes, please put your email in the chat. But that's one of the voter guides that we use for reference. And NASW endorsed yes, but you could see on the other side that ACLU and another progressive voter guide actually is voting no. So it really comes down to just like the nitty gritty of do you want to pass like a property tax law to revise it that doesn't address other issues in housing. I hope that helps, Emily.
Yeah, thank you.
Could I just add real quick on my proposition Prop 14? There's one thing that I forgot to include there on the no side for opposition. Just real quick, there's different viewpoints. The NASW is in support of Prop 14, just so you all know. On the opposition side, for some progressive platforms, one thing to just keep in mind that $5.5 billion in bonds, when we give that to the national or the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, none of that money is necessarily coming back to residents of California. So any patents, any pharmaceuticals, anything that is developed out of the Institute doesn't necessarily go back into taxpayers' pockets. And so there's been opposition from some progressive platforms. Just wanted to voice that too, because I didn't state that before.
Yeah, there are definitely some interesting intersections here between some of these propositions and how the NASW is rolling. And we're going to see some very interesting things in the coming year, if not number of years, regarding the financial situation in our state that are definitely going to play out following this election as well. There's lots of good comments and questions in the chat box, so make sure you're checking there in case you haven't been, for some other resources and or questions, comments, conversation, etc. Make sure if you haven't already, if you want more information or the guides that Grace mentioned earlier, to put your email into the chat box. Also, as kind of a preamble, we will be holding a second follow-up event, which will be mentioned again later, but I wanted to make sure to take a minute to mention it now, which will be a week from tonight. And that is more of a community-based event where we will break into small groups, which will allow us to kind of have affinity-based group discussion around some of these propositions. So as these questions are coming up, just know that there's another opportunity coming up next week to talk about them in greater depth.
Is next week's event just for students, or is our alumni allowed to come?
All folk. It's open to anyone and everyone in the community and elsewhere. So part of the idea is to expand the reach and expand the kind of knowledge-based voter information that we can. So yeah, invite your family, invite your friends, invite your neighbors, invite whoever. And we're going to organize a variety of different identity-based or interest-based groups to have breakout conversations. Okay, are there any other questions or comments before we adjourn with our closing statements?
I had a quick question about Prop 23, about the dialysis. I've been seeing a lot of commercials about it, and I'm just kind of confused on like on like what the good way to vote, and not like that's poor choice of words, but do you know anything about like high infection rates in like dialysis clinics? Like, is this like a common thing where like patients are often like neglected in dialysis clinics to the point where like it would be harmful to vote no to this? Am I making sense? Because I'm seeing that it's saying that a lot of dialysis places will shut down. And then I'm also seeing that I guess the dialysis clinics probably often have poor hygiene if they're even proposing this. Like, I don't really get it.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing the research on Proposition 23, and to be honest, I've been seeing all the commercials, right? And you see all the no on Prop 23. They don't really go in depth about it. They just want you to feel bad that you're gonna kill people if you don't, go against it. That's generally the essence of what it's giving. I also don't feel like they're being very, informative about it on both sides. I feel like they need to give more information. But working as a hospital, worker, I think it makes sense what they're asking for. And I can't say that every dialysis clinic runs the same because, right, every healthcare industry, or like, let's say you can't say Kaiser works the same as UCLA. So it's hard to tell. You won't know. And a good point is that Westwood is going to look so much different than Compton looks like, right? If you were to go to step into a dialysis clinic. So it's not clear enough. I feel like it's still missing enough information that the community needs to hear. Yeah, if I find more information, I'll let you know.
I had heard, I had heard from someone that people were more likely to die from the infection from the dialysis treatment than they were to actually die from, like, because of the needles, the unsanitary, the uncleanliness. People were dying from that as opposed to like the actual dialysis. So that was what I had heard in terms of this proposition and why it was being enacted.
Yeah. And I can see why that would be important for them to report, right, their infection rates, because there are going to be some places where the infection rates are higher than other places, depending on how they're practicing dialysis there at that clinic.
Thank you, guys.
Right, so I think we want to be respectful of everyone's time. If there aren't any more questions, we will be emailing you all this PowerPoint as well as the notes which show the voter guides that we've used. And if you can join us next week at 6 p.m., same Zoom link. It's gonna be, we're all in this together, so how we can talk to our families and our communities about voting and about some of these issues. We hope this has been a good event to talk about these fun propositions, and that we've shown how it does relate to our everyday lives and social work values.
And Grace, could I just add one thing, because I forgot to mention this at the opening. So this is a teach-in, and teach-ins have historically been where students and community, faculty, whomever come together to share information and knowledge. They started in the Freedom Schools in the South in terms of getting young people prepared to go out and do that work to push back and fight for voting. And then it transitioned into teach-ins happening in schools, colleges here in California, universities here in California, to push back on the draft during the war. And so our thinking is that this teach-in model would be an opportunity for students to take the lead and share their knowledge and expertise about issues that are of importance to them. We will have a series of teach-in events in the upcoming weeks and for the rest of this academic year. And I hope that you all will attend. They are open for everybody because this is information that's coming from our students, from our faculty, and from the community at large. And so I just wanted to get that little plug out there that this is our first teach-in, and we will have additional teach-ins moving henceforth. And the purpose and function of the teach-in is really student-led and student-driven. And I just want to thank my students for jumping in and creating, doing this work to talk about something that will impact and affect all of us from years to come. So thank you everyone for attending, and we hope to see you next week, same time, same link. Ciao.